that we have this afternoon. I hope everybody is safe. And the topic of our discussion today is basically something that's been in the, besides the BBI, something that's been in the media for a while, partly driven by some thinking that David has spoken about in the media, but something that he wrote about a while back too. And that's about whether Kenya needs an amnesty policy for economic crimes. So I'll try to give a background. I think we as Kenyans would be glad, would have to acknowledge that we've had a corruption, especially public sector, corruption driven by public sector for a long time. We could say, if we were very cynical, that corruption remains, just like our independence, one of the few things that we grew for ourselves outside the colonial government when we received independence. Now, one of the things that I think every time Kenya makes a decision about reforms, I think the question of corruption comes in as a complicating feature. It's a complicating feature because among the things we need to do is how do we draw a line, but also we understand largely that corruption is damaging, but we've never had more or less a consensus or a very well-informed discussion about how do we fix or how do we even respond to it. The main ways in which we Kenyans respond to it, obviously, is by legal fixes. So increasingly over time, if you look at every new law, I think the penal code is now full of not only questions related to what corruption in its various manifestations, bribery and all those would be, but also we have a specific institution and specific laws that are supposed to deal with anti-corruption. So we have anti-corruption laws, we have a whole motley of institutions, and we have committees here and there, and every now and then we generate reports and speak about it. Now, a couple of weeks back, David was on a TV station speaking about an initiative that he has participated in. And among the things he mentioned was the fact that we Kenyans need to consider very, very seriously about how to deal with this bundle of historical corruption that exists and which continues to perpetuate itself through the public sector. And of course, generated quite a bit of discussions here and there. So I spoke to David and I asked him to actually come and explain, because I think just even basic political economy analysis tells you that this is something that perhaps needs more incisive discussions than as simple, or rather, than the idea that we must continue with prosecution, investigation, and ramping up more resources that are used to quote unquote fight corruption. From the rudiments of what David discussed, he suggests that we may need to consider on the table, among the many things that we deal with, questions about an amnesty policy. So I'd like to say four things before. I think our discussion today is for David to present those views. That's one. Two, I think some of the comments that we saw, including people who spoke to us and sent protest notes to the IEA about facilitating, providing a platform for this to be discussed in terms of what exactly is an amnesty policy. And it's completely different from immunity, which many people used interchangeably in some of the angry emails that we received, which is fine. So the purpose of the IEA is basically to provide a platform for a discussion to be made. And David will give us a political economy analysis embedded in Kenya's history, which he understands very, very well, and tell us what options we have. Because the truth is, I think there are trade-offs in fighting corruption, and we have to consider those very, very well. But at the same time, the central place that corruption and the pillars that have been built by those who have are strong enough that mere protest, in our view, would not be sufficient. So that's the background. I'll introduce the IEA. The Institute of Economic Affairs is a platform. We consider ourselves a think tank. We are an association with members, and our work is basically to provide platforms for informed discourse on topical issues in Kenya's economy. Formed in 1992, David formed a big role in that. He's usually modest about it, but he did. So it's good to get him back home in a way. But we thank you for being with us here at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and I'll open this up now for David to make a presentation. David, we allocated you 40 minutes. I hope that's not too much or too little. And then we'll have a question and answer session and hope we can close by 4:10. So David, go ahead.
Thank you, Kwame. You I wish to thank you and the IEA for hosting this webinar so that we can clear the air and stop getting, hopefully not reduce the trolling of people by people who confuse amnesty for immunity. But also you've preempted my opening remark that it's always a pleasure for me to come back home to the IEA, even though it reminds me that I'm there. Because I think it is 27 years today now since we set up shop in Wood Avenue, sometimes in 1993. I remember going out to buy the furniture. I don't know whether the furniture is still around. But yes, IEA is a very special place for me. I would like to speak for about 30 minutes, so I hope I can save some time. And I want to spend only about 2 minutes on saying what I mean by amnesty. You've said a bit of it. And then about 3 minutes on how I think it could be done, or what kind of process that I have in mind, or what kind of processes deal with sort of things. And then I'll use the 25 minutes saying why. And this is the background that you talked about, the political economy and all that, because I think justification for this kind of policy is probably fundamentally more important in terms of getting people to participate according to the new principles established for us by the Supreme Court last week of civic education and participation and such type. Now, so let me go straight on to what and how I will handle them together. As you have said, amnesty is not a carte blanche forgiveness or pardon or immunity. Actually, no one, I think, has legal authority to do that, to go out and say, I have forgiven you all your crimes. I think that is the preserve of Jesus Christ. But amnesty for me, I'm using it as a shorthand for a judicial process that is anchored in law and that can bring corruption cases to closure or corruption issues to closure using sanctions other than conviction or acquittal in a court of law. Because what we are doing now and what it has failed is, and it hasn't just failed us on corruption, this is Western retributive justice. And we know that in many of our communities, really retributive justice is used very rarely. We have more culture of restitutive justice. In Gikuyu, on things like these, which one might call sort of moral crimes, we have a process which is called utahikio. And then you vomit what you have done. You're meant to vomit or cleanse. It's cleansing. And that is followed by the jo, which is a fine, more in the character of restitution. And then the community accepts you back. So, and I think that is the spirit with which I see where we may want to go with corruption, because Western retributive justice is not working for us. I might go further and say, to the extent that we have made progress on political violence, it was not by using Western retributive justice a la ICC. I don't know what I can call the kind of process that brought Jubilee together and killed the ICC cases, but we have to admit that as sort of unpalatable it is to some of us, including myself, who would have liked to see a different kind of process. I myself am rethinking, have found myself often rethinking whether in fact we place too much faith on Western and international justice in particular, in that particular case. So that's the background. Now, some of these sanctions may include, as I said, restitution. They may include lustration. People should not hold public office, and there may be others. So, but the emphasis here is that, as you said, it's not immunity. It is actually a justice process. It is not escape from justice. In particular, let me be blunt and say it is not an escape route for William Ruto or anyone. Because at any rate, if William Ruto or anyone becomes president, which is partly why they probably want to become president, a president is immune from prosecution during their tenure. And in Kenya, it's very unlikely that we will prosecute ex-presidents. We didn't prosecute Moi. We didn't prosecute Kibaki, despite Anglo-leasing and all of that, even his sort of people involved in that. We are not going to prosecute Kenyatta, I don't think. And personally, I also think that the possibility of prosecuting William Ruto ever, given his current political stature for corruption, is next to nil. So let me put that to rest. I don't think he's a person who needs it. But people sort of see this as a red flag and think, oh, this is an escape route for William Ruto. It isn't. How do you do it? As I said, what I see is a law that is passed, setting up a special court, let's call it Economic Crimes and Corruption Tribunal, or Past Economic Crimes and Corruption Tribunal. The law would say how it is constituted, who can sit on it, as judges or people who, ex-judges or whatever, powers of the tribunal, its processes. And in my view, all the cases in court from the cutoff date that would be established would be transferred there. So one of the things you want to do, you would be wanting to clean the slate for the courts and the prosecution and EACC from this sort of burden of old cases, so that those institutions can have independence to deal with new cases. And one of my strong premises is that as long as the kind of people with the financial firepower I will talk about shortly are being prosecuted, those institutions will not have independence. And I'll explain why. Obviously, there are people who might prefer to prove their innocence in regular court who are already there, and they should be allowed to do so. So there's no compulsion that your case should be handled by the tribunal other than the courts. But other than existing cases, I think more importantly, what a tribunal would do that the current courts cannot do is that people who have corruption matters they would like to clear would be able to come forward and say, I would like to return this piece of land I obtained corruptly so that I can have a clean conscience and sort of go about my business without looking over my shoulder. And by the way, quite a few of those happened when NAC came to power, including what is now Procession Away from Serena to State House, which I am told the titles of Procession Away were returned by none other than one William Ruto, without any amnesty process. And that matter was closed, and that's the end of it. So we do these things. The other group is people who have evidence of corruption that they would like to present to the tribunal because they feel very aggrieved that they know of egregious corruption that is not being investigated. So in this case, in fact, what you're doing is casting the net even wider than what the prosecutorial system that we have at the moment is able to do. So people would say in our school, so much money disappeared. We believe money disappeared, and the headmaster and the chairman, and we would like this matter dealt with. The other group, very important to me, is victims. That is people who have suffered because of corruption. They have not been able to get justice because the system is too powerful and corrupted against them. Mostly, that might also include the scapegoats for the high and mighty. If it is proved that they have really been victims of high-level corruption, they can get compensation either from restitutions that are obtained or the pool of money that comes from restitutions, or perhaps from those who victimized them as part of the closure of that particular matter. So it's a process, it's a societal process that would want to change. You can see, would want us to sort of draw a line and bring issues to closure and see whether we can become a more honest our society and better society. Now, why do we want to do this? And why not continue with what you're doing? I've heard John Githongo personally many times because I've been in many places with him on these issues. Say that we have reached the limit of the legal technical anti-corruption approach of doing things. And he summarized it very well in one of the columns he wrote on the elephant on the March 2017 called The Myth of Anti-Corruption. And I would like to read from that or quote from that quite extensively. And he writes, I have abridged some of it. One of the defining characteristics of the fight against corruption in Kenya has been an intense level of well-funded activity on the policy reform front, including government, civil society, religious and private sectors. While in the real world, corruption has not only deepened, but widened in society. After 26 years of anti-corruption in Kenya, the phenomena is worse than ever. The surveys of local and international civil society and research groups bear this out. More importantly, though there is a widespread perception that graft has worsened dramatically, particularly over the past 3 years, the entrepreneurs thrive in the toxic mix of chronic capitalism that feeds off the normalization of conflict of interest and impunity. The sheer number and scale of scandals that have accompanied the current regime are equivalent to a golden bag scam that cost 1 billion every 6 months. While the scale of the plunder has started to have macroeconomic consequences, the impact impunity is having on public morality has been even more devastating. What is clear, he concludes, is that in Kenya's case, the public policy reform, technocratic approach to fighting corruption has become utterly irrelevant in the current political context. So we have reached the end of the road by using the conventional tools of fighting anti-corruption, including, I am saying, the criminal justice system and its system of retributive justice and adversarial law. I think the most important words here, however, are public morality. Corruption has eaten away our public morality. We have helplessly watched as it consumes the economy over the last 9 years. We have watched helplessly recently in the last few months as corruption and impunity trained its guns on the Constitution. But for the bold court ruling last week, we would be on our way back to pre-1992 political order. People are bribed, intimidated. We saw MCAs bribed and intimidated. We saw parliament bribed and intimidated. But this is, in fact, this possible defeat of BBI, and I hope it is a defeat of BBI. It's only one battle. The war is not won. The stakes for the forces that are hell-bent on subverting the Constitution are huge. It's huge amounts of money. What we have now in Kenya, especially after the last 9 years, is a kleptocracy that is prepared to bankrupt the country as long as it stays on top of the rubble. It's like a Mugabe type regime or a Bashir type regime. You don't care how much you impoverish the country as long as you yourself are wealthy and you have control of the levels of power and security apparatus. And you can go on like that for a very long time. But you have impoverished the country, the professionals and the elite have fled, others have, the economy has gone out ground, you've become a sort of dystopian society. And that is something that I think we are on the verge of. The economic mess that we are going to inherit from this regime is going to take us the next 5 years to sort out. And that is assuming that we don't have another post-election crisis. And I can assure you, if we don't change how we do our politics, we will have another post-election crisis. And a decade from now, we will be here asking how all our neighbors left us behind, because we will have this cycle over. It's cost us 5 years, this last second term of Jubilee. It might cost us the next. And if it costs us Probably the next might be sort of staying in limbo. Then we have a midterm election, which have always been problematic, and we are talking 15, 20 years if we don't break this cycle. And how do we break this cycle? We are not going to break this cycle until we acknowledge and deal with the fact that what is its core problem? It is a kleptocracy that is able to weaponize fighting corruption, to leverage on that, to threaten people, to blackmail politicians, bureaucrats, all sorts of people to actually run a shadow state. That's what we have. And this is not, it has happened in other countries. And that's exactly where they have ended. So that's the phenomena that corruption has become. It was remarked 2 centuries ago, I think, by a French sort of philosopher, an economist, Frederick Bastiat, that when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. And I am putting it to you that that is where we are. We have created a legal system that actually nobody, what is a formal legal system? If you look at it, and that's what I think John was saying, you have all the apparatus looking at it. If you audited it, it is a very elaborate apparatus, but it catches and stops no one. Yeah, and I'll give some examples. So let me give some examples, 2 of them, which I call case studies. Case study 1. An interview. I want to quote from an interview in which there was a face-off between Rigathi Gachagua and David Murathe on KTN in January 28, 2021. And I'm quoting how Gachagua concluded that interview as he was being asked about his own corruption investigation. And he was replying to David Murathe. I want to remind you that when we were with you before President Uhuru came to power, you were bankrupt. Today, you are a multi-billionaire. You have made all this money and nobody is asking you how you made it. Yet, before this president came to power, everybody knows you are bankrupt. But since this president came to power, you have made deals with the Chinese, you have extorted people. Today, you are a very wealthy man and you are still free. I can tell you, even when Ruto takes over, we are not going to pursue you. We will let you enjoy your money because we are not vindictive. We are not going to use the criminal justice system to punish people who disagree with us politically. Gachagua was talking about what he calls his own political persecution, about being blackmailed by DCI over his own corruption and money laundering case, which involves about 5 billion plus, or probably up to 10 billion shillings, which, according to Business Daily, and I quote, money started pouring into Mr. Gachagua's account soon after the Jubilee administration rose to power in 2013. Did Gachagua do business worth 5 billion plus? I doubt it. You don't just wake up one day and do business worth 5 billion. My take is that this is what he was doing, is he was a conduit for political money, probably relating to ICC cases. So in a sense, he was a conduit and doing political work with this money for both William Ruto and Uhuru. And when they fell out and he chose one side, then the other side now is trying to blackmail him to come back to the fore by using this case. And he was saying he's not going to succumb to that blackmail. In a subsequent interview, Senator Murkomen accused Murathe of extorting Chinese, as alleged by Gachagua, on the Thwake Dam project. He did not deny it. In fact, far from it. He owned up and he gave us a name of having a finder's fee. And so no problem with that. On TV, what's the problem if some people ate finder's fee? Now, I want to disclose here that Murathe is my in-law, and we meet socially quite frequently. And Gachagua was my IEA mate and friend at the University of Nairobi those many years ago. And we've recently made political reacquaintance in William Ruto's political circles. So these are not people that actually we don't know. We socialize with these people. I'm sure I have benefited from a bottle of whiskey or two from David Mulave's plunder in social settings. Case number 2, Evans Kidero tax case. KRA claims a tax liability that Evans Kidero owes 680 million shillings. But Kidero is able to come back and say of that money, that is not true. He doesn't have that kind of tax liability. In fact, of that 423 million shillings was campaign donations. He then gives a breakdown of the expenditure: campaign center 53 million, agents 55 million. And the figure that I am interested in is 37 million shillings contribution to ODM, his political party. But I would like you to read that as contribution to Raila Odinga's presidential campaign on my authority. To Evans Kidero's contribution, I would like to add contributions to many other governors to the Raila Odinga and NASA campaign who had corruption issues and still have corruption issues. So that corruption campaign was heavily funded with public corruption money or dubious money. Let me call it very dubious money because these people have corruption issues. So as an aside, this is where I get rather amused by people asking me how I can associate with the corrupt root of people, as if the people I was associating with before were very clean. And I'm left wondering, why do people think Raila Odinga hangs out with Jimmy Wanjigi? And how clean is Moses Wetangula? So in this country, even if you want to do progressive or decent politics, if you don't have the stomach or you think to rub shoulders with corrupt people, you can't do it. And so, but if you don't do it, then you should sit on a moral pedestal and criticize those of us who do. Because there is no clean side. So if those of us who want to be clean, the only way is to stay away and then let the criminals run the show. So the first point is about this 37 million contribution, and it's probably not the only amount. So that's the way our politics is financed. Point number 2 is that Kidero spent 400 plus million to win his re-election. Why would he do that? And by the way, that figure is credible, because I do know that an off-reels presidential campaign will cost you about 3 times as much. It will set you about 1.5 billion for you to have a serious campaign. And it's not like the money is squandered. If you are running a presidential campaign, you need something like 150,000 people to man your vote protection in polling stations. And if you provide those people with just a sandwich and water and airtime and notebooks and blah, blah, you're going to spend about 3,000 per person, and that's close to 400 million shillings already. So our politics is very expensive. So who's going to pay for it? We, the middle class, don't pay for it because we don't contribute to political parties. So who is left to contribute? Wealthy people. These wealthy people will contribute. Where do they get the money? And what do they get in return? Yeah. So that's something I think those of us who are moralizing and standing on moral pedestals need to ask themselves. But more fundamentally, I saw a poll recently that put Gashagua's approval rating in Nyeri at something like 80%. That means if he runs for governor of Nyeri, he's a shoe-in. I gather Kidero is running for governor of Homa Bay. He's probably another shoe-in. So we can predict, I think without fear of contradiction, that the next parliament and governors' mansions will have the most amount of corrupt money behind the candidates, the people who are elected in history. So these people, where some of these people saying, oh, these people must go to jail, as I wrote recently in social media in a tweet, they're not going to jail, they're going to parliament, and they're going to governors' mansions. And we are the ones who are going to take them there. We're going to elect them. Because I have met people who are going on and on about how these corrupt people are. But when you meet these particular people, you'll be surprised how differential they become. The very people who are saying that these people should go to jail, when they meet them in person, they are all sort of very effusive and, in fact, taking them aside so that they can invite them to their harambes and other things. So we want to ponder. So if he's going to have the most people with the most corrupt money behind them and corruption skeletons, then we are talking about a parliament and government which will have the most vulnerable people, people who are most vulnerable, most number of people who are vulnerable to weaponization of corruption against them. And you saw what parliament did. Many of the people who voted for BBI in parliament is because they are skeletons. They have files that could be invoked. That's why they were behaving so funny. So we want to ponder the following question. If Ruto becomes president, do you trust Gashagua's word that they will not be vindictive? More importantly, do you believe that President William Ruto or President Raila Odinga or President X from Uhuru camp, whoever that might be, will allow the law to go after Governor Gachagua, to go after Governor Kidero, or Senator David Morave, as the case may be? Yeah, they will not. So that means if the law is going after, tries to go after the president's most useful allies, he has a huge incentive to interfere with those institutions or to maintain interference and undermine the independence of those institutions. So as long as our politics is what it is, and as long as we vote people indiscriminately, because that is now the standards of our public morality, our public morality standards are that we elect the most corrupt people. That's who we vote for. We replaced Kidero with Sonko in a free and fair election, I think. So as long as that is what remains, there is no incentive for the president to allow these institutions and the whole cabal to allow these institutions to work. The only way we can liberate these institutions then is if we put closure and draw a line and say all your friends, they will be dealt with by a different process, which can have different outcomes. Okay, and we persuade them that it is in the interest of themselves and the country to do that. And anything new, please allow these institutions to work. Because if we repeat the cycle, we are all going to go down. And that's the position I'm trying to get the public to go behind. I don't think the leaders want it. They would like to maintain their hold on the institution, but the only way I think we can liberate these institutions is if we enter into a bargain with the people who are themselves captured, captive to the culture of corruption in the way that they are. But besides the politicians, there's another very important constituency, and that's the public officials, probably in their hundreds, who have been used to execute Jubilee's corruption rackets and who know where the skeletons are buried. I suspect many are now living in fear at the end of the regime and probably shredding a lot of evidence as we speak. This poses, I think, three risks, or a couple of risks, 2 or 3. First, it's a risk to their own lives. These are our families, people who just happen to find themselves in a particular office, which was required to do corrupt things. They were probably sort of given a share of the loot, or maybe not. I mean, the fear of losing their jobs and all manner of things. So they're both perpetrators and victims. It's never black and white. It's gray areas. And if the people who made them do this think that they are the risk, some of them will not hesitate to eliminate them. And we already have seen 2 or 3 murders recently that look suspicious, like covering up of corruption trails. Secondly, besides the risk to themselves, as long as these people remain in those public offices, it is in their interest to keep the evidence hidden. That makes them also vulnerable to be used again so that this evidence stays hidden. The best protection for them is to ensure that the next government also gets ensnared in those corruption networks so that they are all safe as guilty. They are all equally guilty. And this is exactly what the Anglo-Leasing cartel did to NAC, as captured by Eric Lengmeno in his ever so flowery language in an op-ed he wrote 2 weeks ago. And I would like to read, because it's very poignant, about what happened to NAC. After Kibaki declared that corruption would cease to be a way of life in Kenya, and that's a quote, in December 2002, the dragon mobilized and virtually captured or compromised his government. Titans of sleaze quickly installed their deadly accolades in the corridors of power and gleefully fueled acrimony in NAC, so that by 2005, the question of fighting corruption had been stood over generally as the government focused on survival. The biggest donors to the campaign on both sides of the aisle are often chieftains of graft. The better to ensure that, quote, neither foes or loving friends can hurt them. Now, as somebody who wants who is exercised by how we will deal with the mess and the consequences of the plunder that has gone on over the last 9 years, 10 from next year, the ravages of the economic ravages and social ravages of COVID, which may still be with us, I ask myself, are we going to be able to do that? Whichever government comes in, whether it is one I have anything to do with and one I have nothing to do with, will it be able to do that if it is also a target of the kind of corruption, money, and cartels that we're talking about? I don't think so. I think it will be ensnared, and like NAC, it will be running around like headless chicken. It will probably sort of explode in scandal within the next couple of days. Everybody becomes completely cynical, and any chance that it will have of turning around the economy and dealing with the crisis of COVID, which is very severe, both social, the health and economic consequences. As long as if we do not find another way to offline this historical graft, it's not historical, it's the graft of the last 10 years, to offline it so that it is being dealt with in a different platform, in a different process. Like NAC tried to do with Golden Bag. They tried to do the Golden Bag Commission so that you could extricate the Golden Bag cases and the way Kamlesh Patni had corrupted the judiciary so that we could clean up the judiciary. And over time, some of those attempts, very difficult attempts to clean up the judiciary, I think have paid off a little bit, as you can see. So, and I think we have to find a different process to try and clean up the executive and the legislature. That's where I'm coming from. So I end by going back to my friend John Githongo's words, that the public policy reform technocratic approach to fighting corruption has become utterly irrelevant in the current political context. I believe I have laid out the political context factually, if somewhat more bluntly and graphically than is usual for this kind of forums. But I think it is the language we need to begin to talk about this very bluntly and pointedly. We are going to extricate ourselves from this situation. So that's my case for an amnesty process, and thank you very much for listening to me. I think I've kept to my time.
Yes, you have. Thanks, David. I'd just like to ask everybody to note that, yes, we'll be receiving questions right now. So if you can use the chat box, that's fine. But if you're not, in a couple of minutes, I'll ask you to use the icon for your hands up. So you raise your hands and I'll call you up three at a time, so you can ask 3 questions and David will answer. But before you do that, as you prepare with identifying where the icons are and where the chat box is, I'd like David to I won't try to summarize, but I'll say some of the things that you say that are poignant in my mind is part of how a society gets honest with itself is knowing where to draw the line. And you're telling us that basically the limits of legal, technical, anti-corruption approach is dead. I mean, it will not yield the goals that Kenyans want, basically to clean up the state and to get us to start on a clear state, for reasons that you've mentioned. One of them is, of course, if people have billions of shillings to feed into hiding evidence, into even taking out potential witnesses and everything else, we have a really problem, big problem. So basically, the criminals are the state, in a matter of speaking, because they've captured the key organs, and even if they do not, they're just a call. I mean, most of these guys are phone call away. In addition to the fact that the evidence exists for the people who'd be witnesses against them to also be prosecuted for having enabled that and all that. We saw that quite a bit in NYS, where people who were expected to be witnesses suddenly were also caught in, and obviously that's a murky thing. So even if we assume that, David, we were able to agree, and the politics of it is difficult, as you say, because we like signaling in Kenya. Virtue signaling seems to be a national hobby. We are more moral than people X. But David, isn't there a moral hazard? Because if we say, let's draw this by allowing people X, because I think also that the obsession with President Ruto and President Kenyatta alone with regard to corruption is one of the things that would make this a very sensible argument, in my view, very difficult to sell to Kenyans. But one of the things that Kenyans think that if we drew a line and had an amnesty, when people talk amnesty, many of them think it means immunity. But whatever we agreed, lustration, whatever it means, even if it means some of these people have to be kept out of court, they have to pay us a portion of their loot back to the public sector. Are we sending a signal that corruption is, or economic crimes are forgivable? That's how do we capture this? Because it would have to be a legal process by saying, look, guys, this is the only time in this generation this is going to happen, so that the new institutions that come will actually have to do their best, knowing that there's no chance that in another 6 or 5 years, or maybe 10 years, we are coming back to an amnesty question. That's the thing that really bothers me. Do you have an answer to that?
I can clarify. I don't see this amnesty process as a short time-bound thing that closes the whole thing. I actually see it as a parallel judicial process, more in the spirit of alternative dispute resolution. So we're saying, let us give our justice system, the justice for this thing, more tools. Yeah, like lower thresholds of evidence, like people coming forward, not just those who've been caught, like restitution for victims. Let us give it more tools, because it is now, so it becomes more of a moral rearmament sort of situation. And I think it should go on for a very long time. The court would decide, the law would decide how long, but I see it more as offlining the political corruption of the past, so that it is being dealt with. But in the meantime, the courts, the regular courts, the DPP, the EACC, you can then make a case for putting in independent people there, in the sense that the president will not have an interest to interfere, because his cronies are not being taken there anyway, unless they do something new. In which case, you're saying new corruption will now be dealt with in the conventional sense, in the conventional courts. But also, it allows us to clean up the public service so that we do more prevention. So what we are going to be dealing with is political corruption of this sort of shadow state. But even today, the system is still dealing, the small fish are still being fried. The small fish are being fried. It's the big fish that are not being fried and will not be fried and will not allow themselves to be fried. So saying, can we then tell these people, if you want to continue in power, we as the people demand that we have a justice process. We put your issues in a different justice process, and then you leave our institutions to function. And we are seeing that if you have independent institutions like the judiciary, they can actually make a difference.
Okay, Thanks, David. So it's clearer to me. I'd have thought that it was supposed to be a time-bound thing, but as you say, actually, if it's time-bound, then you generate the same problems that we intended to. So let me just ask the people who have questions with their hands up. I can't see who has their hands up, but whose hand is up? There's a hand.
Hello.
Okay, Opondo, you have your hand up. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. And I mean, it is very amazing listening to David indeed, and even yourself, because I remember we once had this interesting conversation, I think somewhere in Madare, the Madare Justice Center. And it's just quite amazing because this is a conversation that I've really wanted us to have for quite a long time. And now my question is, if anyone is to get any kind of amnesty, the question will be, what will we use? Maybe David Ndii can also tell us, what will we use to know who deserves it and who doesn't deserve it? Like what levels of economic crime? And just maybe also just as a follow-up on what you've asked just a few minutes ago, what will we do to ensure that again, after another period of 40 or 50 years, we're not coming back to do the same and looking at the same as a solution? Thank you.
Thanks. Next is Walter. I see your hand up as well, Walter. Please ask your question. Just unmute your mic and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you. Just
Hello.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for this forum. My question to Dr. David Ndii is in regards to the cost of campaigns. But although the amnesties are good, but does he think so long as there is the cost factor of handouts during campaign, so long as that exists, doesn't he think that looting will still continue to the perpetuity of Kenya, so long as the handout culture exists and the cost implications of campaign? Thank you.
All right. I can't see any other questions, so maybe David, you can handle those two, and then we'll come back to a second round.
One, what will we use to know who deserves it and who doesn't? I think that's a fairly straightforward question. As I said, it's a judicial tribunal, so it has judges and it has so they determine once they are given the powers to make those decisions. They don't belong to us. All we are doing, I'm saying, is we are offlining this past political corruption so that it is dealt with differently, because it imperils our institutions and because the retributive justice system is not fit for purpose. It gives us no other guarantee. So it is not a miracle cure. Yeah, it gives us no other guarantees. There's nothing that can inoculate a society against corruption. All societies have corruption. We saw a very corrupt president in the United States the other day. But because the institutions have withstood the test of time, they survived it, but they barely. So what I'm saying is that our institutions are very nascent. If we don't find a way of offlining this political corruption so that they can grow, they will not grow. But it is not a miracle cure. It's not an elixir that will make people honest. We will become a normal corrupt. Hopefully, we will become a normal society with normal levels of corruption, but not one where you have a shadow state that is taking everything down with the country down. So it is from very bad to probably bad. That's what we are talking about, quite honestly. The cost of campaigns and handouts. I think one of the things that this sort of process would be able to do, if it is well designed, is that because it is a social process, not just a judicial process, like the courts, which is insulated. It is a much more public process. I think it then compels society, and one would hope that civil society and religious sector and other peoples, it would become a discussion point. And then it would begin, because the only way that you can begin to deal with the culture of handouts is through some sort of culture change process. And one hopes that this kind of platform could trigger that kind of re-examination in society. We can also have a conversation whether there are other ways of funding politics. And in many countries, there are sort of public funding of certain things, which reduces
Can we have a voice up, please?
The potency of corrupt money.
I'm not hearing.
Yeah, so, pardon me? Yeah, so it is, as I said, it is a ritual in a sense. It is both justice, but it is more ritualistic in a social sense. That hopefully then out of it, we will come out a society which is, it is basically, I think on a scale of 1 to 10, our public morality now is at 1. And if it gets to 0, we will be a failed state. So in this process, can it get us to level 3? And then hopefully we grow so that you can get to about 5 or 6. That's the spirit of what I'm talking about.
Okay. So David, we have a question from Gladwell. And let me just read it out before I can ask. So Gladwell says, what would precipitate the situation where the political elite are even prepared to engage in such a process? What bargaining power do we have? I think she means we citizens. And why would political elites stop engaging in corruption when the rewards for corruption are that huge? So that's Gladwell's question. And then I'll ask Joram, whose hands are up. Joram, please unmute yourself and just ask the question directly to David. Go ahead, Joram.
Yes, good afternoon, Dr. Day. Yes, I think mine is also closely related to what Gladwell has asked. Martin Shkuku must be turning in his grave because of the 3 roles of parliamentarians, legislative, representation, and oversight. I think because of the coming into place of CDF, that role that is also partly executive has compromised in a very big way the oversight role for parliamentarians. And you can see now, even the BBI proposals, that has gone also down to the word, their proposals to give these people also monies. So how now do we, given that part of the responsibility of parliamentarians is oversight, how do you see that also playing out with respect to what you are proposing? Thank you.
Response to Gladwell. I expect this to be a struggle like other struggles we have had to bring progressive agendas onto the table. So I don't expect the political elites to just wake up and accept it. So I would expect some civil society mobilization of citizens and public opinion, and probably culminating on a political platform that makes this its main agenda. I have tried to interest many sort of civil society actors in the recent months that this is a platform that we should engage the current political class on. And I have to say I'm disappointed that it hasn't gained the kind of traction that I thought it deserves. Yet I don't know what it is that civil society now considers its politics. So Gladwell, sort of throwing that back to you, the audience. The question of Joram, I don't know how to respond to that, because this is not an omnibus for solving every political institutional design problem that we have. It will not deal with the issue of CDF and all these other things. I think those have their pros and cons. I think when CDF came about, it was in fact to prevent blackmail of politicians by the executive using development. You know, when the opposition would be told, Siasambaya, Maishambaya. And I think it has played that role in some sense. So everything has its consequences. I am not persuaded that CDF was either corruption or undermines oversight. And I have worked very heavily with Parliament over the last decade and a half on strengthening oversight. What undermined has undermined Parliament more than anything else is the toxic politics of tribalism, beginning with beginning with the PV in 2007 and culminating in the ICC cases. I think that's the biggest driver of the kind of situation that we find ourselves. Is what we set up a bar in the Constitution, Chapter 6, on integrity, and then immediately we suspended it so that we could allow ICC indictees to run, and that's what we are paying for. That's really the whirlwind that we are paying for. I don't think it's things like CDF, although they have their problems, are that salient.
All right. Okay, thanks, David. Let me come to another 3 hands that are up. Abdi Aziz, please ask your question. And then James will be next, and Mutisia thereafter. Abdi Aziz, go ahead. Okay, looks like Abdi Aziz can't hear us. Let's go to James. James, are you there? Your hand is up. Please ask your question, James.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Go ahead.
Yes, Dr. I'm just curious. Isn't this like attempting to kill a hydra? Because once you're pardoning this, sorry, the word is not actually pardoning. There are other people that are being groomed into this. I'm talking in terms of, for example, the BBI. There was this proposal to have a youth council. We all know all these kids, if they are youths at all, they are being groomed to be pushed into this system. Even still at when they were campaigning for the BBI, and still the fighting of the court you see online right now, it's being done by young people who are sort of, I'm trying to avoid the use of the word brainwashed, but there seems to be some sort of grooming of young people to enter this mess. So isn't this what you're suggesting, sort of like trying to kill a hydra? Because once you stop this, something else is coming up.
Okay, thanks, James. So next is Mutisia. Please ask your question, Mutisia. Just unmute your mic. Thanks.
Thank you, Kwame, and thank you, Dr. for the very interesting presentation and taking the time. My question is around this parallel kind of system or process that Dr. is advocating. Now, when you look at the kind of traditional social foundations of law, you know, punishment in itself, the idea is that it deters would-be offenders. But if we establish an amnesty-based system in parallel to our already existing retributive justice system, do we not create a risk, Daktari, that those in power can game the system? And what I mean by that is, you know, take case in point. Anyway, let me not mention particular individuals, but can they not steal billions? Okay, proceed to make returns from their plunder, and then elect to take what could turn out to be a small portion of their vast empire in the future? I.e., can they not make a calculated decision that this corruption is actually worth doing because they can give up essentially the principal amount later and leave the rest and live a very comfortable life thereafter? You know, case in point, in fact, the first family, how far do we go back if we are to pursue ill-gotten gains of, say, you know, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta? How far do we go? And what then do we, what do we take back and what do we leave out? That's my question.
Okay, thanks, Mutisia. Let me just take the third. Wainaina, you have your hand up as well. Please ask your question so that David can answer the three together. Wainaina, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Kwame, and thanks, Dr. I actually don't have a question per se, but I want to have like 3 comments. One, I fully agree with David that the entire question is how do we frame this amnesty question? Is it what would be the basis of the framing the amnesty itself? And I will illustrate this using South African model. They chose a conditional amnesty. It was part of the bigger TRC process, but they did establish their own subcommittee, actually a full committee full of judges, investigators, and others to specifically process the questions about amnesty, the conditional amnesty. And the framework of the whole of that process was anchored in the Truth Commission. It did not exempt people from being prosecuted. There were bargains. If you are not able and willing to be part and parcel of the conditional amnesty process, then there was nothing that was going to stop you from being prosecuted. So we need to have a very clear clarity on how are we framing the amnesty, what will be the buy-ins and all those kind of things. And I think David is correct in saying that we will have to have an appropriate legal framework governing the whole of that process. I think also the whole question about the institutional framework on which you are going to anchor that judicial amnesty process. What sort of character will that mechanism be so that it's clear to us? That is that we need to be very specific about a process. You see, what was feeding the South African Amnesty Committee was the entire TRC process itself. Those people who are processed through the TRC process, and then they were referred to the Amnesty Commission, the Amnesty Committee. So we need to ask ourselves, what will be the feeder process for the entire of the amnesty mechanism? Do we need to do a comprehensive audit of the past crimes and then feed the whole of that to this judicial amnesty tribunal, or what exactly is it that will feed into this? There has to be a beginning point, and then the internal structuring of that mechanism. I want to leave it at that, but I must add that it's a process. It's not a kind of an instant thing. It's a process. And one final comment, sorry for this, is this. What we are seeing today is a country with a very progressive constitution, with very well-established institutions constitutionally, but they have actually been bastardized, captured, and controlled by that parallel corrupt system which feeds the politics of the day. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. So David, perhaps you can answer those 2 questions, because the third one was Wainaina's comments about the institutional structure, which is something you actually said you would have to be worked out. So let's go ahead.
I think the first question was, can people game the system, and how far back do you go? I think I said you draw a line, that it is matters that happened from a particular date, and at this point I would imagine it is from when the law is established, or matters that are live in the court or whatever. So future matters will not belong there. So you cannot do things and hope that they will end up there, because it is got a cutoff date going retrospectively. Secondly, how far do we go? I am not an expert, but I believe the people who will do this will be looking at statute of limitations as well. What sort of statute of limitation makes sense given the problem that the purpose that you are trying to solve? What problem are we trying to solve? Let me be very specific. I am trying to solve the problem of weaponizing anti-corruption to undermine democracy and rule of law. I'm not trying to solve all our corruption problems. I would like if Jeffrey Gachagua or Ivan Skidero is elected governor, as they might be, not to be vulnerable to the weaponization of corruption, so that if they don't do particular deals, then their files will be opened. And But if they do new corruption, then we have an independent EACC which will go after them. And even if the president is their friend, we will have at least given that EACC and probably gotten that process to president to make an undertaking that he will not interfere with investigations, because even he or she would tell his colleagues, look, if we have sort of these processes, these old things we did have been offline, then you do new things, you are on your own. That's the only problem I am trying to solve. So there is no immunity. I'm just saying that any one of those people who thinks that they are vulnerable or they can be used, they can be killed, can go and register their issue there and say, I would like my issue dealt with here, and there is witness protection and security, or it is not as threatening, as high stakes a forum, a judicial forum as the court system. I think if we had done what we had been asked to do and do a domestic tribunal for the post-election violence, we would not have ended up with high stakes ICC toxic election and government. And some of this corruption, like I believe that's what some of the money laundering things that Gachagua is being accused of, is being tracked for, they are product of that. So let us not pretend that we don't know where these things came from. There is actually a connection between the corruption of Jubilee and ICC and PEV, and that is what has really corrupted our political system. The land grabbing of Kenyatas and others, those things are in the TJRC. And I think that's another conversation.
Okay, all right. David, I have some questions that were sent to me earlier. Someone sent to the IEA. I mean, some of them, of course, were people who intended to irritate us. So one of the things that someone says that politics is about perceptions. Now, how does it play that soon after David decides to work with a presidential candidate, does he take this approach? David explained that at the beginning, but maybe for the benefit of whoever wasn't here because the question was posted late, maybe David, for their benefit, because we are in a public education platform, you could clarify that again. And then Mr. Wafula Nabutola says, this is great discourse. And I mean, he says, is it correct to state that it is completely a lost cause? In other words, is our national project a lost cause? Because if witness protection, what if witness protection were properly done? Do we stand a chance? And then, of course, he's asking the rest about statistics. What is the proportion of clean and unclean? That maybe we can find out later. But basically, sticking to the point, he's asking that is Kenya a lost cause in terms of corruption? But what would happen if witness protection was properly done? Let me take a final question and then we can come back. Oh yes, Gladwell's question, I think, which you responded to. But perhaps I should re-emphasize. The final question that she asked, which someone has asked me again to re-emphasize, is why would political elites stop engaging in corruption when the rewards are so huge? I mean, looking at a growing state in terms of the amount of money that's available for the state to spend, we think at the IEA that procurement fraud is one of the biggest areas in which obviously gains are made. So why do you think that it would stop it? As it is, you already said that, yes, that the idea of an amnesty is not to provide an elixir or a silver bullet to all corruption. But people still seem to think that it should have something that actually some deterrent effect for people who've engaged in corruption prior. Then let me come to some people with their hands up, and then we can deal with a couple of those questions. One is I cannot see it. Is it Abdi? Let me see. Okay, there's someone with their hand up, but I can't see them on the chat box. So perhaps you should please just unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes.
Is it Abdi? Abdiaziz, yes. Abdiaziz, please just unmute yourself and ask the question directly to David. Abdiaziz? Well, he seems not to be here. So David, just go ahead. He seems not to be here. I don't think he can hear us.
Yeah.
Hello?
Okay, there you are. I think it's coming.
Yes, Abdiaziz, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I was just struggling with the microphone. I'm back. So I just want to know. Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Abdiaziz.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Hello?
Go ahead, Abdiaziz. We
So
can
I
hear
just
you.
want
Please
to,
go ahead.
yeah, I just want to know the use of this amnesty. The use of this amnesty. What is the use of this amnesty? Because now there are some countries that these laws are there for human rights, like Tunisia and Libya, but I think we need to have also to look for accountability, because there are some leaders who will just come into power, loot the public resource, then with this kind of amnesty, they'll try to get away. So I think I just want to know also what kind of accountability to safeguard it.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Abdiaziz.
Concern.
David, before you answer, there's a question by Mbewa also has his hands up. Mbewa, please ask your question. Thanks, Abdiaziz.
My question is around the finality of this process. In Kenya, we have a habit of where after some process is done, we run back to the court. So my question is, Dr. can clear or give how the process will it be final, that once we deal with the case, it won't go back or it won't be reopened again, something like that.
Right. Thanks, Mbewa. So David, yes.
Okay. Let me see. Where am I starting from? I am starting with the which was the first one before Nabutola?
I was just
before Nabutola.
Gladwell.
There was a
Yes,
question.
that was Gladwell.
Yeah.
Gladwell is just wondering, how do we ensure that even after an amnesty policy is in place, that the huge rewards that exist for corruption in the public sector will not end?
It will not end. I think, as I said, we have reached the point, again, back to Bastia, where we have a moral code that glorifies corruption. And the legal system then tolerates it in the state. If we don't have a process which tries to socialize our public morality differently, there is no chance. So I want to keep emphasizing that this is a cultural ritual. Besides being a judicial process, it's a cultural ritual. And I hope that what comes out of it is, when you come out of the other side, we as a society begin to stigmatize corruption, so that the people with corruption cases are not given the front pew in church. Yeah, so there's a lot of work to be done within society to accompany this ritual. It's not a mechanistic state. We have left too much to the state. And again, back to John, I think there are many of us who are sort of stuck in technocracy. They're looking for technical fixes. It's not a technical fix. That's why you said we've run out of those. It's not a policy process. It's a judicial process. And fortunately, there's no society we don't have a judicial function with a moral ethical dimension. We are in the moral ethical realm. Yeah, we are taking this to the moral, away from the technocratic to the moral ethical realm, because the technocratic has failed. That was the beginning premise. So we can't keep going back to what we know as technocrats. Yeah, we need to get above ourselves, get out of ourselves, of the technocratic bubble, which I think is also the point, the same response to Nabutola. This is not, I mean, the question of witness protection, those are the technical things which have failed. And I gave the example of if you look at, if you go to Northern Kenya, I've seen cases where somebody has committed a murder. I remember one case, somebody committed a murder. And then the clan took this person to the police for custody to avoid a conflict with the other clan, a conflagration. And they told the police, hold this person, we will go and settle the blood money with the other clan, and then we will come for the person. So when they came for the person, they found that the police had charged them. And they were like, why did you charge them? We have our own ways of resolving this thing. And now you have taken our person. So it became now a problem between the police and the two clans. Yeah, that's the kind of dysfunction that we have because of the difference between our moral ethical foundation of our justice, our moral ethical worldview of justice, and the sort of juridical view of Western justice. And I said that again, I said at the outset that I think in retrospect or with the benefit of hindsight, I begin to grudgingly acknowledge that perhaps the way that these Uhuru and Ruto went about PEV, politically and more sort of culturally, probably has more promise than the ICC. I have now remembered the first question. How is it that when I began to engage with a particular political candidate, I bring that out? I would like to refer that person to an interview I did on the taco because I gave a very long explanation of that. And I said, look, this is what I see. Why am I doing this? I think 2 years ago, I did a controversial tweet and I said, look, given what I'm seeing happening with these people called dynasties, if we have to suffer one evil, I think I'd rather we suffer William Ruto. I was very serious. And I think that's where we ended up. And I reached out to many people. I told them, look, including, I will say here, my civil society friends, very senior luminaries in civil society, the John Githongos, the Willy Mutungas, and all sorts of people, Kibuda Kibwana. And I asked them, look, there's something which I am anticipating. If indeed we are going to have to find that the political tables have been turned, and it is now that it is William Ruto who is wearing the progressive hat, what are the principles? How can we have a principled engagement that can actually take us forward politically? If that is who is going, these people have sort of changed sides as they always do, and that's the one who is now wearing the progressive hat. That's more than a year ago. And I put this question. I actually convened a meeting, which was at KHRC, and put the same proposition to many civil society leaders. It was followed by a very nasty repost by Bakao Mutua in The Nation that I am now fraternizing with William Ruto. I have been very transparent about this. So my conscience is very clear. That if we have these two sides to deal with, one which wants to protect impunity, and one which might actually be prepared, whether it is Machiavellian or not, has been thrust into the space where it wears a progressive hat, then I think we are going to have to play the cards that we are dealt. So I have absolutely no apologies. People can go back to those conversations. I did not, as Kwame said, start talking about this yesterday. I have already said in this conversation that at any rate, if William Ruto becomes president, he will not need it because the president is immune from prosecution. What I am concerned about is if William Ruto becomes president and he decides to weaponize corruption against his enemies. That's what I would be concerned about. So if I was William Ruto's enemies, I would be very sort of interested in this conversation, because here there are many people who have made enemies of him, and much as my friend Gachagua says they will not be vindictive, I did pose a question: do you trust him? So that's my take on that subject. I'm quite honest even with William Ruto and his people, that it is not because of their virtues that we are working together. It is despite their vices. So this is not about moral posturing at all. So I hope that sort of, but I would encourage people to go and listen to that sort of interview that I did with Bitok quite a while back. I said, why would people stop? I was going to ask. It's unless we're able to change socially and we stop glorifying. We as I said, if we do not find a way that we stop making plunder our way of life, then we are doomed. The question is, do we just give up? There's somebody who told me there are a lot of youth, and how do we know I mean, how be able to cut the head of the Hydra? I don't start from defeatist premises. I really have no defeatist bone in my body. So I take on things. A few months ago, people are telling me we can't defeat BBI, and going to court is a waste of time, and all these people are captured. Now these people are saying something different. So I really don't pander to defeat it. I try what I can, and this is my idea of we keep trying. All the things that we have achieved is because we tried, and some of them we tried when they looked like hopeless causes. And I think this is the same thing. I think the question of Abdelaziz is, again, needs to be to elaborate that. It sounds to me that you are reading amnesty as immunity, because when you're asking about accountability, amnesty is a different accountability process with more on the menu, rather than either you go to jail, because there is no option in court other than going to jail or being set free. Now, if I have stolen 4 billion shillings and the court will send me to jail if I am convicted, believe you me, I will spend 2 billion shillings, and believe me, I will not go to jail. So that's a very weak system of accountability, and that's precisely the point I'm making. We start this premise as if it is perfect. It isn't. It is, or even effective. We say it is not even effective. So what Amnesty is saying, can we try a different process, including negotiating with these people, so that we then see how we can insulate our institutions from the amount of money they are prepared to spend to go to jail. I am a complete realist in this regard. I'm an economist. In economists, we work with self-interest, cold calculation. We really are not trained not to be given to sentiment when we look at things like this. And Bella asked a question about finality. As I said, again, it's a judicial process. A law will have to be drafted by experts, including constitutional experts, so that it ensures that there is finality. And I don't think that's very difficult, because if it's a judicial process, then you cannot have double jeopardy. Once you are taken through that judicial process, then it will be clear that it cannot go back to court. So I think it does have finality.
All right, I still see one hand up before we wrap up. We just have 5 minutes before our time. So Njoroge, you have your hand up. Please ask the last question, then I can, so that then we can allow David, as he answers that, to also make the final comments. Njoroge, your hand is up. Please ask the question. Njoroge Kamau, please unmute yourself and ask your question. I don't think he can hear us, so okay, fine. You'll have to just send it up. Okay, so David, perhaps you can make any final comments, then I can wrap up the meeting, since we promised to let you go by 4, and it's actually 3 minutes too.
Thank you, Kwame. I think this has been a wonderful conversation, because people are asking very honest questions. They are very concerned about whether this is a process that would work. I think my response to the people, look, we start from the premise that what we have isn't working, hasn't worked for 30 years, is unlikely to work. Yeah. So if you keep doing the same thing and expect different results, I think we know what they said about that. So that's the starting point, that it isn't working the traditional way, because that has certain assumptions. But now corruption is embedded in our politics. It's become a cultural sort of norm. It is acceptable in our societies. We elect Sonko. So as we look at this, let us look at ourselves and ask, who's going to take us to court? And we are sort of also participants in this process. If we keep sort of taking small fish to court and saying people must be held accountable, and then we take the big fish and elect them to public office, what are we doing? Yeah. So let us look at it from that perspective. Finally, it is not a panacea to corruption. It is, to my mind, as I've said, dealing with a very specific thing. The fact that in the next government, we are going to have people who both have a huge motivation to subvert our political institutions and democracy, and secondly, who are vulnerable to corruption being weaponized against them, so that the level of political dysfunction that we have observed during BBI becomes the norm. That is the specific problem that I am trying to deal with. It is not the corruption of all times. It is firefighting, so that we can get a chance to do other things, so that the next government, whoever it is, does not sink the way the NAC government was sunk, as I read in that quote. So it is very specific to that particular problem. Finally, if we are to do it, it will take a lot of pressure from citizens and civil society telling politicians that we must enter into this bargain, the way we forced them into a constitutional bargain, which, as they say, was forced on them by Wanjiku. I'm saying this is the next thing that Wanjiku has to force on the political elite. So it is not something that we're doing for them. It is not something I'm proposing for them. It is not something I'm proposing because they agree with it. I expect them, even if they don't oppose it directly, to fight it behind the scenes. So I am putting this agenda as an alternative political agenda for progressive forces, not as an agenda for William Ruto and his friends, even though I am working for them on economic, whatever, and protecting the constitution and other things. This is not their agenda. This is my agenda. So that's where I want to conclude.
Okay, thanks, David. But I apologize because I blocked somebody who wanted to ask a question. So this guy.
Sorry.
David, we can't hear you.
No, you can't hear me? I am not muted.
Okay.
No, I
okay, fine. Go ahead now.
I had finished.
Go ahead now. Okay. Well, I'll just say that there was a question by what's his name? Let me just read it. Sorry. Yes, there's a question by Njoroge Kamau. For some reason we couldn't hear him, and he asks, so I apologize, I have to keep you back for a few more minutes. He says, my question is based on an article Daktari had written, where he'd written that corruption is an ethical problem where the ethics of the primordial public are different from that of the private. How does Amnesty reconcile the two? So that's maybe a question you should bear in mind. And then Mr. Namu says, Arthur Namu says, making peace with the devil is no solution to corruption. It is suspect that David is coming up. He says that making peace with the devil is no solution to corruption. It is suspect that David is coming up with this proposal after he has changed political sides. I mean, a question that you've answered before, but it's like David, you'd be answering this until we publish the paper. So please respond to that as well, and then we can close.
Okay, the first one was about the article I wrote. Again, let's not connect everything with everything else. Okay, let's deal with the thing we are dealing with. This, I think that sort of academic article was pointing out a much more fundamental problem of African politics and the role of the elites, and in fact, precisely why corruption, which is explain the situation that we have, corruption done in the government is legitimized in the social realm. People steal from government, then they donate to Harambes and for people medical bills and stuff like that. We are not going to solve all those problems at once. We are going to solve through a process of political development and maturity. Because we cannot change our culture overnight, our political culture overnight. It is a colonial legacy. So I think intellectually it is where I'm coming from, but practically it is not what I'm dealing with. It is actually informs realizing that, again, the bluntness of this sort of Western retributive justice when you are dealing with a problem which has become acculturated. So that's where you're coming from, but let's stick with what I'm talking about. I think the thing I think people like Mr. Namu unfortunately are coming from is they have this binary where they demonize one person and not the others. I set out at the outset that in my experience, the amount of corruption I was dealing with NASA is not different from the amount of corruption I'm dealing with William Ruto camp. So I don't know whether people noticed that NASA did not run on an anti-corruption platform. We couldn't because we couldn't. It would be dishonest to do so. I was not able to get the NASA principles to make a commitment. And I think if people recall, even before we had a conflict, we had a crisis around our manifesto, because we wrote a manifesto that we were very clear we would not do Jubilee mega projects. And then Raila and Wanjigi took that manifesto and they went in and inserted all the mega projects that they had entered into deals with Chinese and other people. So it was quite clear that if NASA had come, that sort of everybody's victory, we were going to be struggling. It was going to be struggling. And I already decided at that point that that's not a government I would have been prepared to join, because it was quite clear that what we were saying and what we were going to be doing. I mean, it was even some of the projects we had put in there and the way they had gone about, the fact that they were prepared to put those projects in the manifesto because I think they had been paid or they were going to be paid or they were going to sort of produce campaign contributions. It was actually a very ugly thing within NASA. Yeah. So I think people who speak from outside and you do this by the Ruto is very corrupt, as if the other people are clean. So for me, I've never dealt, even the Kibaki, right? I remember John Githongo and I had a lot of disagreement because he thought that Kibaki was behind him in the war on corruption. And I kept telling him from the day one that he wasn't, and I was right. Yeah. So I have a very different perspective of this thing because I'm in there. And I think people from outside, they are saying, so you're doing clean and falling for this propaganda. I think it's very unfortunate coming from somebody as experienced as Mr. Namu.
To be here. So thanks everyone and have a good afternoon, or at least whatever is left of it. Thank you very much, David. Bye, everyone. Thanks.